We are a sexy group.
We are alive.
Lots of heavy breathing.
Our fans. Am I right?
All right, and we're live.
We're live like 5 minutes early, huh?
Yep. I see the bill.
It's very Swiss of us.
There's Carrie and Maria. People are joining.
Hi.
Hello,
Hey,
hello.
Carrie.
How are you all?
Good, good.
Fantastic. It's cold here.
Hey there.
Hello. So I'm going to be lighting fires all day. Hello.
Hello, hello.
Cool. What's up,
Hey, Jason.
Pretty sure you're still loving that mic, Bill.
I need to figure out where to play. It's the first time I'm using these new headphones.
I know how it goes.
About now. Mainly used for gaming.
Your sweet gaming? Like your
Sweet gaming. Yeah.
I like your background, man. You have like a nice office background in your room.
It's
Yeah,
actually really terrible.
With the Liverpool
Like a red? It's so
nice,
like
it's nice Liverpool red.
yeah. It's like he's on a documentary.
That's right.
It's like he's in a barn.
I actually use it a lot for green screening, so I can just like I can pretend like
Yeah. You're the beach.
I'm in a waterfall. I can just
In
swap it out
space.
whenever I want. It's perfect, really. All right, let me share.
Don't you know what's in right now? Is that you're supposed to look like you're in a barn while you're inside. That's the new hipster thing.
That's the new hipster thing. Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, so you're nailing it.
Is there a newsletter where I could subscribe to those tips?
It's petty at hipstermoves.com.
Sweet.
Nice.
Do I also know what type of crate to use for drinking coffee? Like I moved from milk crate to like crates for logistics. Like you just let me know what to swap in and out.
Well, first off,
it just has to be a small shaped table.
yes.
Carrie actually is the inventor of the newsletter. Corey just distributes.
I'm just there for the back end.
Stop it.
I had the most hipster sake last night. It was in a jar, but the jar was like sealed with foil. It was very strange.
Sealed with what?
Like a foil, like
Airplane food.
No. I mean, it looked like plain food. It was like a plain food jar with sake inside. It's like what? Anyway,
Was it good?
Yeah, it was all right actually.
That's all that matters for sake.
Damn, Corey, your mic is amazing.
Yeah, dude.
All that matters for sake.
What do you know about this?
Oh my God.
We should have you host all the town halls. So coming up next, we have the UXR team.
Smooth overtones with Corey
Bringing
White.
up the rear. UX.
Can you also just like randomly put in some background music as well?
Sure. Like light jazz, some elevator jazz.
That'd be great. So on tap. Whenever there's awkward silence, just put in elevator music.
I have some good Swedish metal.
That's even better.
There. Jacek.
Cue Jacek. Love that.
That is one wall you got going on there in the field.
It's Liverpool red.
It's Liverpool red. All right. It's 2:00, so we can get started. So we've been streaming for the past 5 minutes, I think, already. So welcome, everyone. We have. So, like, it is what it is. Welcome to our 22nd town hall. We're back on our regular schedule of bi-weekly town halls. Hope everyone made it back safe from Prague, whether you're at DevCon 4 or the hackathon. It was great to see everyone. Today we'll be spending most of the time talking about a follow-up from Prague and the quality time we spent together as a team and what status will look like going forward. The other two things we have, one is the UXR team showing off some of the work that they've been doing over the past few months, and then Embark with, I think, going through some last minute stuff. So it's not quite the usual schedule town hall, but yeah, let's kick it off. Jared.
Oh, yep, there we go. Yeah, cool. Exactly. So I hope everyone got back okay, is feeling recharged after all the intense festivities of the hackathon, Crypto Life, Eth Magicians, and of course, DevCon. So we basically got together over 2 sessions at the offsite. The first was really to kind of understand, like, well, to really try to answer 3 questions, like what we're building, who we're building it for, and how we want to go about it. So I ended up writing up this post today, kind of recapping a lot of that, and also talking about some of the next steps. So definitely go check it out. Where is it? Hello?
Yeah.
Can you move to the next slide?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yes. So basically, this is a working draft of the mission statement made from a phrase that we ended up putting up on our DevCon talk, really trying to answer what Status is. And Status really strives to be a secure communication tool that upholds human rights. We enable community money, community law, and through privacy, preserve culture. In that other post, I do elaborate on this. So we're trying to get away from this idea of like being like a secure messenger only. And the reason for that is because we are enabling so much more other kinds of forms of communication. You can view transactions with tokens, for example, as a means of communication. You can view interacting with contracts in general as another means of communication. So yes, we do have a messaging component, but we also communicate through dApps essentially. And what we're really trying to do with the mission statement is trying to find something that's a little more emotionally compelling, a little more engaging, and connecting it back to humans. So if you have any ways to reword this or any other ideas on what could be better on this and make it more emotionally compelling, definitely reach out. Yes, and had some good comments on like questioning the community money and community law and what these actually mean. For those who don't know, then community money is essentially this idea of creating some kind of form of money, but it's between like a very small group of people that have some kind of common interests. So for example, Bitcoin or Ethereum or even the Status Network token is a form of that, a form of community money. But Ethereum is a lot more than that. It's also community law because it allows for programmable blockchains, allowing you to have smart contracts on there. So you can imagine us socially organizing over some rules that we've defined between ourselves, and that we adhere to them. And that's essentially what we mean by community law. And through privacy preserved culture. And essentially what the blockchain gives us is a way to kind of minimize behaviors like book burning, for example. It also allows us, if we have a secure messenger, to allow no one to really tamper with those communications necessarily. And through that, you can have better communications and allow people to participate within their greater narratives, thereby preserving their culture. One of the first session that we had, we were really trying to answer who we're building this for, to answer what we're actually building. We came up with 3 major groups that I could see. We started with everybody because ultimately this technology is going to underpin a lot of the social fabric of our society. And of course, everyone can benefit from blockchains in the future. It does reduce the attack surface towards like corruption potentially. But that's definitely something that's like many, many years away. The technology is not mature enough, and we're inexperienced, and we're still learning to wield that technology. And then we kind of like backpedaled from that and looked at ourselves, and there was some really, really inspirational quotes that came out of many different walks of life. I remember, I can't paraphrase Chad, unfortunately, but Chad had a very eloquent way of expressing helping out people and why he was coming to the table. Andy is like living in conditions where he sees real world use cases, and Oscar, of course, leading the principled stuff, is living a very principled life. And so it's just amazing to see that we have so many different ways of building for ourselves. But what really underlies this is this intrinsic motivation. It really matters why you come to the table and why you want to work on this. And it can even be for things like, money, because there is money here. I would personally like to see more meaning in that, but I mean, it's definitely an intrinsic motivator. And somewhere between these, we kind of identified what was called the dispossessed. And these are essentially people who are not serviced well by the existing society that they live in. So this can be between like journalists or whistleblowers, all the way to separatists, even people who are living in formal economies and in slums. And you can actually tie this back to mass adoption, right? Which is our major arc that we're trying to achieve in getting to ultimately everyone. And the way that you can do that is recognizing that the United Nations currently forecasts that by 2030, over 2 billion people are going to be living within slums and in informal economies. And that's basically because of mass urbanization trend that's happening, where people are moving away from countries trying to get into cities, but cities just cannot support the housing in private markets. So you get these slums forming around them. If you do the math, it's like roughly 166 million people migrating every year. So there's definitely a huge opportunity there. The other side of that is like how we actually go about making design decisions. If you go back to our principles, we're talking about decentralization, coercion resistance, continuance, privacy and anonymity, that sort of thing. And if we work and design for people who are not necessarily dispossessed, but who are well off, we may end up, they already have existing legal infrastructure that works well for them. They already have existing tools that work better than what we can provide. And so even though we can design for them, we may have to make concessions in our design considerations supporting existing legal infrastructure. And that may cause us to create systems that do not uphold human rights. So it's definitely worth considering designing from first principles and finding target markets that can utilize this technology and really need them built in the correct way. Because if we do that, we can actually support these developed countries in the same way. The technology works both ways. So, yeah. So the main thing that I'll be leading and focusing on is the Status Network, or our decentralized autonomous organization. we will be essentially splitting the organization into two. And this is always part of the plan. Essentially, we discussed this at length in our second town hall in the offsite. The naming we're still not sure of. Like maybe we call it the status network and continually evolve this term as the network develops. We could call it a DAO, but there's some issues of baggage around that name. Maybe not. Or we might even call it something else, because what we're actually doing is we're recontextualizing a lot of what we're doing in status in the greater Ethereum community. And I'll describe that in the next slide after I finish talking about this. So where we are up to at the moment, we're working on team formation, just like everybody else. We're doing we've got Graham on board to do PM stuff. Barry's and Ricardo and Richard have shown interest. Definitely inviting other people to be part of that if they don't have any other obligations. We've reconnected with Aragon and GmbH. Aragon we want to build on top of because they provide a DAO operating system. It allows us to do upgradability really easily, and it's great to support another project because we're a big fan of theirs. And the same with GmbH. In fact, in the first iteration of the DAO, we're only dealing with funds, and GmbH has a really interesting contract called liquid pledging. I won't go into it here, but we'll also be renaming that from liquid pledging to liquid funding. That's been suggested from both GmbH and from our own team. So we're currently familiarizing ourselves with their existing code, seeing what we need to change, what we don't need to change. We're working on planning, so I'm writing up a high-level document on how all this will work, and then we'll set up the requirements and user stories with Graham. We still need to make UI decisions. We don't know if it'll be sort of Reddit style or if it can be a graph. Do we want to have an event log that shows the entire operations in sequence? So yeah, like in a nutshell, like liquid funding is essentially like liquid democracy, but instead of with votes, it's with funds. And we may be able to integrate liberal radicalism, which is basically quadratic voting, but with funds. Yeah, that's it from me. Oh wait, no, I've got more. So just to give you a more visualization of like how all this might look like, you can basically view liquid funds as like these little containers that can contain funds. Anybody can fund them and anybody can request funds from them. The funders get veto rights, and the funders can even delegate their funds to other nodes in the network. And the funds can essentially create hierarchies. So you can imagine it like a directed acyclic graph. And in here, we can imagine recontextualizing what we're doing within the greater Ethereum community context. So at the top here, like we might have like a overseeing branch fund, which is like #Ethereum. And of course that connects up to a status whisper chat. Then that brings, they can like flow, those funds can flow down to clients, wallets, and then ultimately back to status, and then down to our respective products, whether it's the wallet, browser, core, desktop, blah, blah, blah. Of course, we have Embark and Nimbus, and these things can get more granular. So like we can get them down to very specific tasks. And the multi-sig will be able to fund in different areas, and the GmbH will act as essentially a service organization that can request funds from all these different buckets, and even other teams can. I wrote more about this in the other posts, and I won't ramble on and take up anyone's time, but that's pretty much it from the DAO side.
Awesome. Thanks, Jared. So then that leaves then this idea of the GmbH, which is kind of the entity that most of us are, like the core contributors, are employed by, and what that means for this. So if you consider the internet in the 90s, right? And this was an interesting slide from one of my favorite talks from DevCon, which was from the Coinbase Wallet team. It was really interesting. And Sid, who's the product lead there, basically showed what the internet looked like in the 90s and how all these people had these great ideas, but the technology wasn't quite there. And similar things were then reinstantiated in an internet generation later and were successful. So this slide actually reminds me a lot about status. A lot of the things we're building, a lot of the things we're attempting are incredibly ambitious. So where do we stand right now? So status, as Jared said, we have the potential to change billions of lives. Working on things like the informal economy is transformative, but we are in danger of being too early. And our run rate, which we discussed a couple of weeks ago, is a bit too high for the progress that we're being made. So the idea is that while this DAO is being created, the status GmbH, which is a working name, will become an entity very much focused on basically creating a great product for people to use and doing it in a way that is a lot more efficient and impactful than we have been in the past 12 months. So what does this GmbH look like? And the one analogous I like to think about it is if you think about Ethereum, you have Ethereum is this ecosystem. There's many companies or organizations working within Ethereum, and then you have the Ethereum Foundation, which is one small corner of Ethereum that takes care of a lot of centralized touch points of Ethereum. And the foundation is it's its own thing, but it's not the entire Ethereum ecosystem. So if you think about this corporate entity as this small element of status that's actually there building the basic building blocks, and then the status network or the DAO will end up superseding it in a large form. But the GmbH still has some sort of role to play. And that's what we're trying to kind of create right now. So the responsibilities for this GmbH will be, one, delivering on the key features of the white paper, which is basically developing a mobile and desktop client, a hardware wallet, and more features within those. And then also providing support functions for the central elements of status that you can't really decentralize at this stage. So things like app security, the release process, our comms, GitHub merge privileges, all things like that are things that right now we can't really or don't have a good way of decentralizing, so they will remain within this corporate entity, and everything else is then fair game and anyone can participate. So the way in which we propose moving to this model, and there's a discuss post that we published after the town hall going into this in a lot more detail, but essentially is putting a lot more emphasis on working as teams. So we first created teams in 2018, in May, and there's been a lot that it was rocky implementing it, and there was a lot of takeaways. I think one thing that we did learn was that if you have small focused teams, you end up with a really a good rhythm and cadence for delivering. I think the key card team is a good example where it's essentially 3 people, but those 3 people working synchronously together have managed to go a long way in say 3-4 months. And the larger a team gets, you end up actually having a negative impact on productivity, as for those that know the mythical man-month idea. We've also found that teams have a sense of ownership and domain knowledge for specific areas. For example, a team of 2 or 3 are focused on the wallet. They know about most things in the wallet, and they kind of are focused and deliver there. And you also have good team dynamics in terms of people working together. One of the biggest cons and reasons why some people weren't too happy with teams being implemented is there's a lot of flexibility that people have on working on things that are interesting, or working on projects that could be impactful but are a little bit more risky. So the idea now is that the flexibility of work, like for example, proposing a new idea to do some crazy new, native client, for example, that's an idea that could be proposed to the DAO once it's up and running, and the DAO could decide to fund it, and then, basically spin off. And all these questions, because I'm sure there's tons of questions coming out from this, will be addressed in a discuss post, and there'll be follow-ups as well. So these are the proposed teams. This is still a work in progress, but you can take a look. Essentially, most things remain as is. One of the big changes is the client teams, so dApps, wallet, and chat, should focus on implementing features on both mobile and desktop. There are some teams here on the right, for example, PR, that we don't actually have anyone for, but we probably should think about it. DevRel, which is kind of a one-person team of Andy. So, take a lot of this with a grain of salt, but I think product is where the majority of impact will be had in terms of major things changing. So in terms of team structure, there's a couple things that I think we learned and we'd like to implement now for the GmbH. And one is to keep the team sizes small and lean. And, the whole mythical man-month idea is that these that the small team sizes, 2-piece teams or 4 to 6 is ideal. One area that we've been thinking a lot about is this idea of team leads. And so we implemented Project Flatten, say 6 months ago. And one of the huge benefits was that people really felt empowered to try a lot of new things and to kind of work on, like, whether it's passion projects or working on certain things. But what we lost was responsibility for certain areas. So for example, someone would start a project, everyone would assume, okay, this person's now responsible. And then a month later, that person would then go work on the next shiny thing. So we lost, there was accountability was lost, and we lost cadence, and dependencies were basically, had people who were working on things that had dependencies following on, they were kind of left high and dry. And looking around at the organization, I think one bright spot has been certain teams who are working with leads in place that I would call them more as conductors, not managers. And basically they're, you could call them coordinators or janitors or whatever. But for example, Yuri on the Embark team is a strong team lead. And that team, I don't think feels like they're cogs in a machine. Everyone feels empowered. Everyone feels ownership. But you have someone who is responsible. So we'll be looking at kind of formalizing these team leads, and they will be responsible for the impact of the team. And the mandate will be that these people are not managers per se, but a lot more about organizing and structuring the flow of the team. So this kind of conductor mentality. They'll also take on a lot of elements that were previously centralized to people ops, things like compensation, events, team get-togethers, all that kind of stuff, there was a bottleneck of people ops not having context. The team lead can now provide that. And how that will look for the product areas is still a work in progress. So it's still not clear exactly how that's going to come out. The other thing that we'll be looking at doing for teams that want to get to use this system is OKRs. So we've had it, and I think we've overcomplicated a fair bit. We use the voting DAP. I think that was an interesting experiment. And then most of the time, as we're doing OKR planning, has focused on how we can get community engagement rather than engaging like the teams themselves. So I feel like it might be worthwhile for us to go back to like the basics. Each team kind of focuses on their OKRs. What are we going to work on? Prioritizes them within the team. Individuals can then take OKRs for themselves. And then if like in say 6 months time, we find that our system is really working, we can then think about community engagement. But for now, I think let's just focus on that. And that's one of the next steps here. For some teams that already have a really well-defined process for prioritization and have like a clear vision of what they're trying to build, for example, the Nimbus team, if the team can implement OKRs or cannot, it's completely up to them. So I know Jacek says that, we don't need OKRs because, we already have a plan that we submitted to the EF. That's very reasonable. So this is not like a hard and fast rule. Every single team needs OKRs, but like, let's get this basic building block right, and then we can see how things go in 3 to 6 months. So this next point, I think Jared addressed quite well in his post, which is coming up with a structured approach to how we build things. Quite often we skip steps 1 and 2 and then go straight to 3 and then kind of sometimes do number 4. Right. And a lot of times what we're trying to build or the user problem we're trying to solve is something that may already exist in the Ethereum community. There is a team or an ETH magician's ring or someone is working on this stuff, and we can leverage or get involved or kind of just be there when this development work happens. And then, of course, specifications and planning, which is like, how does this interact with other elements? And it gives people an opportunity to leave feedback and also there may be synergies with what other people are working on. So let's try and have a more structured approach to how we develop and document things before we just go and start writing code. At point one, I think an interesting point, and Jared also mentioned this in his post this morning, is getting involved with the community. And this phrase, like getting involved, it's like, we should get involved because it's a marketing thing. Like this, it's not about getting involved for the sake of increased visibility for status. It's about us going and reinventing what people have already done. So there's a lot of features in the wallet, for example, that we don't have to build from scratch. There's EIPs that already exist that we should be supporting, and it's expected that an Ethereum mobile wallet should have X, Y, and Z. So we need to be there, and then as we come up with ideas, propose them back into the Ethereum community and say, hey, this is an idea that I've had. I think EIP 1337, which is subscriptions one with the Gitcoin guys, have implemented. There's that post that's linked there. It's really interesting to see the process that they went through, and it's relatively simple, and it just requires a little bit of additional coordination, but you gain a lot, and there's you giving back to the community as well as potentially saving yourself a lot of development time by rebuilding something that someone has already gone and done. So something I would strongly consider, especially for the product teams, is looking to see, like, get engaged in your respective area in the Ethereum community. So what this looks like for next steps. So the product teams specifically, there's a call set up for tomorrow to go through and to self-organize into the respective teams. For everyone outside of the product, I think this, hopefully for the majority of people, there's context and this makes sense. Team leads will start to take on this responsibility over the coming months. For those who want to kind of take a stab at OKRs, there's some points here about what we would want to do by Friday in terms of getting an initial brainstorm together for each team. So if you want to self-organize into the teams you're interested in, and then we can come up with this list per person or as a group, and then sometime early next week and over the weekend, we can go through them. So this is
just on that point.
Yeah,
so I'm basically doing a brainstorm on each part of part of the product or part of what we're building, and making my own personal list on that. And I would like everyone else to do the similar things that are involved in this. All of these things are things that we'd like to highlight. So hopefully we can have that by Friday, and then we can review that and then figure out what the priorities are. The most important part here is okay, yes, we have a lot of fundamental issues which core can handle. We need to think about the user experience as well. Like at the moment, the user experience kind of sucks, and we need to get that up. So let's focus on that as much as possible. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.
Yep. So we've got Q&A now. There's the discuss post will get published now, and essentially there's a link to if anyone wants kind of one-on-one time to either chat with Carrie or Carrie and myself or me, feel free to grab 30 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever you're comfortable with to go through some of these changes. Yeah, I mean, and then as I said, tomorrow there's a 1 hour call at 3:30 for the product core team or whatever it's called, to go through team structure, and hopefully we'll make this transition as seamless as possible, with the end goal of basically having each team very much focused on a given area and executing on delivering the vision that Jared spoke about at the very beginning. So that leads us into Q&A. If people have questions right now, feel free to shoot, and then we can move on to the rest of the town hall. I don't know if there's anything in YouTube or stats. No. All right. Well, feel free to ping. There's the status town hall logistics, or just or just ping me or Carrie or anyone if you want to talk about it. No questions? All right. Cool. So let's move on to next session of the town hall. We have, is someone from the People Ops team want to take this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks, Nabil. Quick People Ops update. We're welcoming back a blast from the past. Rob Cullerton is rejoining us on the closure team. So welcome back, Rob. And also a call to action if anyone is interested in data protection. We're looking for a deputy data protection officer to help Sonia with some of that project work. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, just ping Sonia. Thanks.
Cool. All right. So I got word that the Embark team is not going to present this week. So basically we have the UX product design update from the research and design team. So take it away, whoever is on the call. Who's presenting?
Yeah, so it's going to be a group of us.
Oh, okay, sweet.
Yeah, so it'll be myself, Philip, and Yuhei today.
Okay.
Yeah, we can go on to the next slide. Cool. All right. So yeah, so we just wanted to take a minute and give a quick update on, or a relatively quick update on, what's kind of going on with product design. And when we talk about product design, what we're sort of implying here is that there's a group of us that have been working on what our UIs and what the general user experiences look like or feel like when users come in. And we wanted to address some questions and some points that people had made kind of like over time about, okay, well, what do you guys do? What are you up to? So before we dive into that, I also wanted to just to deviate real quickly and talk about a quick note following on from our Prague discussion. And if I can go on to the next slide, related to who we're building for. And so there's really a lot of fantastic, I think, conversation that happened over the course of the week in Prague. But we also wanted to just to pipe up and interject and say, hey, we have a couple tools and a couple projects that we've actually started over the last 3 to 6 months, where we've actually tried to address this question in various ways. And one of the kind of the projects that at least the UXR team came up with is we wanted to take a look at what drives adoption, or what potentially are people in places like Iran or the UK, what makes them sort of interested in using messaging services and could potentially use something like status. So this is really just more just a broadcast to say, like, we send out surveys and we can adjust these. And I think we're happy to talk to any teams within status or outside of status about figuring out, okay, if we're starting to define who our audience is, we can actually ask detailed questions about, what their gender is, or what their basic demographics are, what their familiarity is with blockchain. If you go into the next slide, we can dive a little bit deeper and ask about main reasons for using services like Telegram or WhatsApp. And this is precisely what we've done over the summer. We're continuing this project. Our next stage is going into looking at people in Japan and Korea. So that's sort of spinning up right now. But I think we would really like, I think, a wider range of input on maybe the different countries, or potentially the different types of people that we would like to target next. So we're certainly open to that conversation. So we can go on to the next slide and get into, well, what is it we're up to? So yeah, you can, next slide. A lot of what we've spent a lot of the time over the summer is tackling a whole bunch of issues related to things that we've been discovering in usability sessions and user research. So these are sessions that we've been conducting in places like Berlin and Amsterdam. And we want to take a quick second to point out that while I think a lot of people sort of get the impression that usability studies uncover a lot of issues almost every time that you do them, there is this point about how we are actually improving over time. And so we've created this quick wall of pride and contrast it, a wall of shame. So it's important to point out that things like chat commands and joining a selected public chat have actually improved in terms of like sort of these objective usability measures that we try and take in these studies, where we say, okay, like 4 out of 6 people or 5 out of 6 people are actually successful at doing these things. They are successful with doing chat commands, for example, or they are successful with creating an account. So it's important to make sure that we recognize that we are actually improving things over time. And then at the same time, there's certainly things that we have been able to consistently sort of observe and measure and say, okay, well, people are still struggling with these particular ways in which we've set up or tried to do something in the app. So things like adding a contact, or getting access or reaccessing, or people remembering how to edit their contacts is still pretty much it's a very hard problem for some folks. And there's misalignments about people's expectations of how they should contact someone or be discovered or be displayed. And so I think a lot of us can kind of identify sort of the similar pain as we use desktop right now. So there's a whole, kind of this group of other issues, but these are the 6 ones that we've kind of prioritized for right now. And what we did back in August is set up what we call these work package projects, where we had sort of 5, we currently have 5 different groups of people, very small teams of people, kind of like interest-based weekly meetings where we get together and we have tried to address some of these issues. And so if you can go on the next slide, this is just an example of, you don't have to play it right now, but it's an example of how a user has trouble actually accessing a contact. We'll see if it works over video. Yeah, I don't think there's any audio, so you can skip it, but I'd encourage people to go back and look at the pain this user goes through with trying to add a contact. This was taken at DevCon with a developer who had a minute, and Philip interviewed him. All right, so I think Philip is going to jump in here.
Yeah, so no, exactly. Thanks, Pat. Essentially, even without the audio, you're going to see a user's facing difficulty, and the entire goal was just to find out how they could add me. So you can see from the video, they're flipping back and forth between screens, not knowing exactly where to go. And you know what's the funny thing is that they have actually created chats already. If you look at the home screen, they have chatted with different people, but this user really can't recall how to even start a chat. So it's interesting. So I guess from what we can see, there's other user studies and talking to users, we found out that there are 4 core areas that people have sort of issues with. First of all, is something I think people are quite aware about, is that chat and identity. Sort of typically, how does anonymous name work? Where do I get it? Who am I? Which sort of led me to compile that list of, who corresponds to what anonymous name. And if it's difficult for us, we can sort of imagine how it might be for, lay users, because we don't communicate that at the very beginning. So in terms of having users, work through that process themselves, as you can see, is a little difficult. And second of all, again, in that video, if it worked, it would have highlighted sort of navigating through the app, getting to where you need to go. For example, people would have expected, I don't know, ENS name is under profiles, but for other things, if I need to send transaction, or why is there a wallet icon in my chat? Is that refer to my wallet or someone else's wallet? Sort of finding out what corresponds to what is sort of an issue. And related to this, DApp discovery and wallet is a lot of new users that we've talked to. They sort of have difficulties getting their first ETH. Where do they go? How do I find out? And sort of these 2 things can be tied together sometimes. But DApp is sort of, I guess, it's hidden underneath our, plus button. So not many users sort of realize in terms of how exactly it works, in terms of how do I filter through, because it's sort of a laundry list right now. And exactly like Ricario mentioned, the menu right now after plus isn't clear. It's sort of like a mini junk drawer to some extent. And then finally wallet, sort of how do we sort of pending transactions versus confirmed transactions, sort of things that users, especially lay ones, still have to grasp, the heads around. Next slide, please. So I guess those are the 4 core areas that we found users having difficulties with. And to sort of address these, we've come up with, I guess, 5 work packages. And I won't, state them all, but essentially they sort of correspond almost one-to-one to each area. For example, you can see identity structure and definitions. Indefinitely corresponds to the first issue that users are having difficulty with, which is sort of identities. And Andre has done some great work that will be illustrated a little better later. And sort of how do we sort of communicate? This is your anonymous identity. This is you. This is how you're shown to other users. So I guess these are the 5, I guess, core packages that we're working on now, but will be, I guess, extended later as well. For the 5th one of the most important things we'll be doing will be some more formative testing and validation. not even, sometimes we'll have like very nice wireframes or prototypes with Figma and Framer, but essentially they can be even lo-fi, because essentially what we're trying to do is just, go as quickly as possible when it comes to sort of building like a new sort of structure when it comes to helping users have a great user experience. Next slide, please. So in terms of expected outcomes, again, I won't go through each of them, but essentially it's just summarized a good UX and what that exactly means for things like, consistent terminologies throughout the app. Because, and previously, I think we've used contact code and then address to refer to people's, long strings of addresses. And this, you can see during some user studies we've done, leads to some confusion. These different terms, something we need to make consistent. And another thing is sort of how we convey those identities again. And as you can see, like various other, I guess, actionable goals we were hoping to deliver on, but we can expand on those in terms of the specific examples we provide. Next slide, please. For example, like one scenario, let's say, is that we found a user, let's say this lay user, who's a sort of a combination of multiple people I've talked to in interviews. In terms of one issue they might have is like for someone who's sort of new to the scene, is they kind of want to go to one place to find out what other things about crypto or what specific topics they can sort of learn more about. And if you go to public chat right now or try to join a public chat, you sort of get this long laundry list. And these are sort of essentially direct user quotes or like, paraphrase to some extent of how they feel. Like, this is a long list. Can I search by interest? Are there more unlisted channels? Because that's the other thing we don't make clear. Like, if you go on a topic, you could theoretically create your own new chat if it doesn't exist already. And that something isn't clear to users, so they think they might be joining an empty chat. And essentially the pain point is here that users have to really dig to find chats, to find out what their interests are, because some people actually mistake the topic for a search bar as well. So personalization isn't there. So one solution or one idea could be, because again, we're not really marrying ourselves to any specific concept right now, is sort of we're trying to find out, could be version A, and we could quickly wireframe test against version B. Is that, okay, fine. In this case, maybe after user onboards, they've done, all their account creation, they come into this home screen, maybe, where they see, hey, this prompt, it's a little lonely here. You can join a public chat. So sort of like making contextually relevant cues for users and not overloading them, and giving them sort of little goals at specific points to make, the whole journey easier. And from there, they can sort of, personalize it and, pick out the chats that they're interested in. So I guess that's definitely one approach we could go for, and sort of highlights, I guess, the process that we go through in terms of, how do we define sort of a UI? Like, we start with a specific job that users want done. For example, in this case, a user wants to, find out what personally relevant chats there are and sort of, build from there and, highlight their pain points and address them through, I guess, or redesigns or, concept creations for wireframes. Hope that helps illustrates a little more, sometimes might be a black box of UXR and UX. And I think Pat will expand a little more in terms of more specific identities and other work package work next, and navigation. Yeah.
If you go on to the next slide. So sort of following on to what Philip was saying there, and addressing what we have identified one of the work packages as sort of a key pain point is actually an app navigation and getting to things like dApps. So we've been talking to the dApp team, as well as Maciej has put together some nice prototypes of how you could envision having a consistent bottom navigation bar where people can, they can pop up their particular chat screen or their chat mode, or switch into dApps or switch into the wallet quickly and easily. There is certainly some things that need to be tested here, some assumptions that we're making. But overall, the idea is that we provide a consistent place that isn't buried behind the plus button that people can use to have as general navigation. If you go on to the next slide, fortunately, Andre is not here to talk about work package 1, but in this work package, what we're trying to do is explore different ways in which the status profile and identity of someone can be managed a little bit more fluidly within the application. And one thing that's come out of a lot of discussions with Corey and Andre and Hester is that it'd be nice to be able to address I think a lot of this confusion by giving users the control to be able to pick the particular profiles that they would like to use when using the app. So if you go on to the next screen, what's being introduced here is this sort of notion of allowing users to come into the app and pick their particular usernames that they would like. But we should also get to allowing them to pick a ENS name as soon as possible. And maybe this is done through profile. Maybe it's done through onboarding as well. But the idea is that we collect all these naming conventions of what we're calling you as a user in one place, in one profile. So what you see here is basically the idea of having a nice, clean, uniform place where people are named things. But then if you want to create additional identities to use within public or group chats, then you might create a new identity by just one particular tap on the profile page, and then you generate your anonymous names that way. So if you go on to the next slide, this is kind of displayed in a public chat. So if you imagine that you're joining a public chat, you're not totally sure who's in it. Maybe you recognize one person in that chat. Then we offer you this system sort of component menu at the bottom that pops up. It should feel fairly familiar to the user, and you decide on the particular profile that you want to use for that public chat. You can go on to the next slide. Here, if you were in a private chat, maybe you would like to, maybe we set defaults for you if we know over time that you like to join as a particular anonymous name, or if for public channels or private channels, we give you that option. So this is just a different variation on that as well. You can go on the next slide. And then finally, being able to manage potentially from that profile screen, maybe you tap into one place where you can actually set your different profiles for different public chats that you know or you use most consistently. So this is also another interesting idea. Finally, I also wanted to mention something really cool that Maciej has been thinking about as well, and that is related to Work Package 4, in which they're trying to figure out how we can make it easier for people to invite friends into status. We think that there's probably ways to do this a little bit more fluidly again, or easily once people get into the app for the first time. But one thing that Maciej has also been looking into is if we do explore this concept of creating mesh networks around where people are, how do we allow that within the UI? And he's come up with this entry point on the top left-hand corner where you get this menu where you can decide on how you want to set your profile, but also discover who else is using status and what particular names they're using to name their own identity, and join by just inviting friends within your particular area. So next slide. All right, so I think Yuhei is going to talk about the voting tab.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello. Okay, cool. So yeah, this is a little bit like 2 weeks old. We wanted to talk about this during Prague, but since we didn't have time, we just wanted to briefly mention it here. So I wanted to quickly talk about and illustrate how was the process of designing the voting that we used for the wall of shame voting during the hackathon in Prague. So the objective was to have a first version of a voting that would allow us to take this first step and experiment, like Nabil said, in this journey of becoming a DAO. And our first real test for this was going to be the wall of shame voting during our town hall in Prague. So to design the application, we started with Graham and the team with the ideation phase. So this is analyzing other voting dApps out there, doing research, learning about governance and all that stuff, creating high-level user flows, as you can see here, in a collaborative manner, and also identifying potential pain points across the experience. So all those red post-its that you see there are things that we knew were not going to be smooth. We definitely went through a couple of challenges. For example, having S&T and Ether at the same time of the poll creation, people having to pay for gas, explaining these concepts that are very complex using friendly copy, also time constraints and the usual constraints in the project. So the next slide, please. So after having a somehow bigger picture, we decided to limit the scope of the first version to just the flow of submitting a vote, just voting. And from there, we moved onto the concept that is creating a lot of mockups and versions in low fidelity. Low fidelity is like this kind of ugly mockups that allow us to not focus on worrying about the details, like focusing on the overall experience first. And we also needed to jump between devices to design the interaction with, for example, the ledger. So that was a fun part of the design process. There's like multi-channel and device interaction. Next slide, please. So after collecting enough internal feedback from all these mockups and designs and iterating on this concept, we decided to go ahead and start prototyping in high fidelity. This means including visual details like color, space, typography, copy, that was really important, and high level very details, specific details. The next one, please. So after preparing this prototype using Figma and do it collaboratively with comments and everything, we went ahead and tested it with people. Thanks to Patrick and the research team, we created like a plan, decided what we wanted to learn, and after getting that very valuable feedback, that allowed us to iterate one more time in order to have a more solid version that we could start implementing. And the next one and the last one is that kudos to the development team that did this in a couple of weeks. During the design process, the development team was also started implementing the backbones of the applications and contracts and all that stuff. And with the solid first version, we jumped into developing the rest of the DApp, like the front end and all that. The experience. And as you noticed, when you voted, the app still doesn't have the status look and feel. And this is mainly because of time constraints, but we are aiming to do that for a second version, hopefully. So this was just a very brief summary of the design work that was done for the voting DApp. Feel free to collaborate and also submit any issue that you find on the GitHub repo. It's S&T/voting. And to make it better. So the idea is to keep working on this and improving it. That's it from him.
Awesome. Thanks a lot to the entire design team and research team. Yeah, I guess there's the status channel if anyone wants to contribute or provide ideas. I think one of the interesting things coming out of DEF CON 4 was this increased awareness of the importance of research and design. And so I'd encourage everyone on the design team and the research team to kind of get involved in those conversations, whether it's an Ethmagician's Ring, or I think there's another one specific to like a separate site the Ethereum community designers use. So get involved and share a lot of these insights because they're very valuable for everyone. Awesome. I think that brings us to the end of the town hall. If there are any questions, we can do Q&A now, whether it's Q&A for me or Carrie for the first topic, or Jared, or for the research team. Feel free to chime in.
How we can participate in the user experience decision?
Good question. So as in get involved in one of the working groups?
Okay, then I have to maybe join.
No, I was just clarifying the question. Do you mean in general, or there's like a specific working group you want to work on?
No, because I think that there is I have a lot of concepts that I could collaborate with to discuss with how to make this UX better, because I have a lot of, like, I'm a developer and I have some problems with status UX. I was complaining in the weekend. Don't know if you saw it. So instead of making that complaints that don't know if everyone sees, I would like to know where I can specifically ask for these problems or point these problems. If there is a repository where I can make an issue. That's the question.
That's a very good question. And I think there's a lot of people who want to ask the same thing as to how can I give my feedback on the design process, preferably before something starts getting built. Anyone on the design team want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, so in general, we have these work packages that we've created, which have separate public channels that you are, or more than, I mean, really anyone is welcome to join in on. In addition to that, I mean, I think we're going to try and figure out going forward how the design team model fits into the GmbH model for the particular projects. So potentially you can imagine where, like, we have, there should be like a UX person that is potentially like a point person, for lack of a better word, or someone that you can go to within the team that says, yeah, like I'm responsible for helping shape the user experience. We also do have a user experience GitHub template, like an issue template that we've created a long time ago that we can reshare out. And that makes sense.
And if you maybe after this, you can put these slides up on a Discuss post along with the channels for each work package, so that anyone can join. That would be good.
Yeah, we'll do that for sure.
Sweet. Any other questions? Any from YouTube? I don't know. Johnny, do you know if there are any?
Nothing on YouTube, Nabil.
Alrighty. Okay.
In terms of the brainstorm that Jared mentioned, covering different parts of the organization and what they would be doing, like, can we get a few more details on that, perhaps, and kind of what's expected in that discussion over the next week? I was a little bit unclear on that.
So there'll be for the product team, I guess the large product team, there'll be a 1 hour session tomorrow at 2:30 or 3:30 Central European time to basically go through in a bit more detail about how we can structure things. And then the idea was that, I'll pull up the slide. Jared, do you want to take a stab at answering the brainstorm part?
Hold on, I'm just eating. Okay, all right. Yeah, basically, like, we're going to be treating like wallets, the browser, core, and chat, of course, as like essentially separate products, even though they're all part of the same product, which is status. It'd be really great if we all like independently think about what is actually like the biggest shortcomings of it, what are the common feature requests, and really understand how we can create a more impactful user experience and create more features and really start pushing the project further. And the idea here is that if we can create this and then maybe summarize create them independently, work with teams to essentially find like the sort of higher priority things or what they think of doable in like a sort of low hanging fruit kind of way, but also things that are actually necessary to get done. And then we can review those together before we get into OKRs. Does that help clear it up at all, or not really?
How does that work with feature parity between mobile and desktop app, for example?
Well, that's a really good question, right? Like, I think that desktop is lagging behind because certain things are not implemented in React Native Desktop, I hope. Although technically it should be the same code base. So it should be pretty straightforward to implement them on there. Although, like, I'm not a developer and I'm not working on that, so someone that's probably more qualified than me to answer that part.
Yeah, so that's what makes me wonder if it's not that the team should be there for a unified code base that then the products come out under. Seems to be what's sort of missing, if that's where we're going towards feature parity across platforms, that if the teams are split up between mobile and desktop, that's not really taken care of in the design that I see from you.
But that's not what Nabil mentioned. He said, like, if you're responsible for wallet, you're responsible for mobile and desktop. So there is a desktop team, but they're doing like more the sort of supporting of the code base on Mac, Windows, and Linux.
Yeah, so the idea would be that the feature teams, core chat wallet, dApps chat wallet, would implement on both mobile and desktop in parallel in terms of developing feature X. And I think that's why we're building React Native on desktop, specifically so that we make that process significantly easier to maintain feature parity. If that's something that's not reasonable or is a really bad idea for whatever reason, let's discuss that tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That sounds awesome. Thanks for the clarification.
Oscar has a question for UXR. What does intermittent connectivity look like in places like Iran? Are there any offline ad hoc network formations?
Yeah, so I'm just answering him in the channel as well. The short answer is we didn't dive too deep into that topic within the survey itself, but we did get feedback on drivers for adoption between Telegram and WhatsApp being because of essentially government filtering that's occurring, and it's slowing down. There's like this perceived slowing down of Telegram because of it, whereas there's this sort of like this less effect on WhatsApp. So really, aside from the products themselves, we think that there's something interesting about because of this sort of like constrained effect that the government filtering is having, that there's an opportunity there, and that that people might be creating their own networks or figuring out workarounds to use the apps that they want to use.
Yeah, so the next question was about canonical ENS username as parent identity seems dangerous, easy to abuse for third parties is part of considerations. So I think that relates to the identity work package that you guys are.
I think that that's also about all these privacy concerns we have in status. So once we are able to choose what identity we want to use in a public chat, that should be solved. Of course, we're always going to have these concerns about privacy, and we still don't have the perfect solution, but having this separation would help mitigate this problem that Oscar asked about. But yeah, ENS usernames basically gives everyone to know, because that's the objective, to find the person. So it's a conflict between privacy and this visibility that you want to have.
Cool. The next question is, what determines the speed at which the app retrieves messages? Because right now it can be a bit slow sometimes. Is anyone on that could help answer that? Followed by a question about adding more status nodes to help with the retrieval speed. All right,
well, I can't talk about the technical application of the chat protocol and how it communicates with mail servers, which I think is incredibly slow. And like for some reason, it's also I'm getting push notifications and not actually receiving direct messages. But when it comes to Whisper itself, there is actually no guarantees in terms of message delivery with Whisper. So it's like sending a message out into the network, and it bounces around essentially randomly, flooding the network, and hopefully it reaches your end goal. On the chat application protocol layer, we should have an acknowledgement. So essentially you have the other's destination, and then you'll know that at least that one message went through. But I think there's a whole set of other issues that are relating to the mail server, which also gives this appearance of slowness. And just like, it's just we need to do a lot better in terms of the reliability and the user experience on that.
All right. Awesome. Thanks everyone for the questions. There'll be, as I said, there'll be a follow-up post on Discuss Now. If you haven't read Jared's post from this morning, please do. And yeah, have a good couple of weeks and talk to you all later. Thanks everyone.
See ya.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.